Hey nerds, Farmer Jesse here. Welcome to Growers Daily, your daily dose of ecological farming insight. It is Friday, March 20th, 2026, and today we're going to talk farm resiliency in the first two segments, and then in the third segment, discuss a little bit about the art of making farm decisions. So let's do it. All right, happy Friday, everyone. I hope everyone is feeling well and maybe even doing some good. We've got a bit of a heat wave coming this weekend that is going to set March records all across the country, so that's cute. It was like 17 degrees Wednesday morning, -8 Celsius, I guess. We had a crazy snow squall happen on Tuesday that caused a ton of accidents, and like I said, the next few days will be record-breaking in heat, so that's fun. Good thing none of us rely on the weather for our livelihoods, or oh boy, that would be challenging. But in fact, that kind of goes along with our theme of resiliency today. But before we get to that, don't forget to always feel free to send in your 20-second farm video clips of what you have going on around your farm and or gardens to farmermike@notillgrowers.com. Love seeing those. Also, someone get me in touch with Zach Galifianakis. I know that's a random segue here, but the new Netflix show looks awesome, and it'd be awesome to have him on the show. Speaking of new, be on the lookout for a little something new from us on this Sunday here on YouTube. That should be a lot of fun. Haven't done a Sunday video in a while. A little something to say thank you for, putting up with my voice and all that stuff. And all right, so where we would usually do Feedback Friday on Fridays makes sense. And we might do that next week, I figured, given that this week was almost exclusively older content that we've already done feedback for. So anyway, we thought we would use today to do another hybrid episode. And depending on my voice Monday, we will hopefully be able to carry on with our regularly and completely arbitrary but consistent programming. Or maybe we'll have to do another week of hybrids. We'll see. But today, what losing my voice has taught me. Okay, so the voice thing. Well, although no one I've spoken to can say 100% what happened. It's likely an infection, but it's basically acted like an injury. I got an injury in the voice. But the difference between me getting injured and, say, a quarterback or striker or first baseman or whatever getting injured in like sports, there really isn't anyone to back me up. So the show just kind of screeches, kind of literally with the way my voice sounds, to a halt. Which is a bummer. It's a bummer because it's a daily show and consistency is what makes it successful. It's a bummer for our wonderful advertisers who, to be clear, have all been awesome and totally understanding. And for you all who have a rhythm, around listening to it every day. Several of you have told me, obviously, to not worry about it and just rest. And I have rested, even if, never been really able to miss work gracefully myself. I did rest as much as I could. But in that way, it's also been a humbling few weeks. And it's made me wonder about how to make this show more resilient, because it's clear that if I can't talk, the show just kind of stops. Now, Mike has done a wonderful job of getting these hybrid and full-on compilation shows together. 100% huge shouts to Mike. Sometimes necessity is the birthplace of invention, and we came up with something workable here, at least for the time. However, the compilation shows doesn't feel entirely resilient. Just it's a solid Band-Aid, but it's not going to last us forever. So I have some thoughts. In the future, and this has always kind of been the case, I think it would be generally great to bring on guest hosts. So it's not just me talking all the time by myself, but, like alongside someone, to make it at least sometimes more discussion style, somewhat like the Wednesday interviews, but more consistent. That way shows could be longer and have more insights from different perspectives. And if one of us went down with, say, voice injury, then the others could step up to sail the ship. We are a long way off budget-wise from making that a reality. The show makes enough to kind of sustain itself at the moment, but bringing on new people would require quite a bit more revenue. However, I think that would add a lot of resiliency if we could figure out how to afford it. I also think me being more careful with my voice wouldn't hurt. The week leading into losing it, I could tell something wasn't right, and I frankly should have just stopped right then. Obviously, I did not stop. Mike and I are also starting to plan more around the potential of me not being able to do a show here or there. Success favors the prepared mind, said Louis Pasteur. And I think that idea is, in general, is the basic idea of resiliency, preparation and planning. Anyway, this sort of fragility has made me think about farming, and specifically farming solo. One reason it's so hard to do is there is no room for error when you're farming by yourself. It's just you and your partner. And if one of you gets injured or sick, the train stops pretty much, like dead in its tracks, except train isn't the right analogy here. And even my voice isn't really a good analogy because unlike farming, the show just stopped, which is really fine. I mean, it's just a soccer show disguised as a farming show, and we can create content in other ways, as you will see on Sunday. On a farm, though, when someone gets injured, nothing stops but the farmer, right? The livestock still need to be fed, watered, moved, the greenhouse watered, and the crops harvested and or planted and or started. All that to say, I'm starting to think about how to design a more resilient show. And if I had a piece of advice to offer to younger farmers who are just starting out, it's to think about how to ultimately make your own farm resilient to your own injuries or unforeseen, circumstances, because things will happen. Injuries will happen. Deaths in the family will happen. Even if it's just dehydration one week that lands you flat on the couch, unable to get up and work, you will get injured, sick, or just need a break. And maybe that's employees that help, maybe it's partners in the business, but whatever it is, it's important to build some amount of resiliency into your business. Every business, even the one where you just kind of talk all the time about farming. Voice injuries. Who knew? See, that's where the screeching thing happens. So anyway, I'm glad to be on the mend, and maybe this particular voice injury will inspire some new design to the show, but also maybe have you all thinking more resiliently about your own farms. So thanks as always, friends. You all are amazing. You all rock. Let me know how you all think about or feel about, resiliency and building it into your farms. Otherwise, onward and upward, we're going to keep fleshing out this idea of resilient farm for the rest of the show. And by we, I mean old me. Anyway, BRB.
Well, this is the beginning of the next big adventure. 8 full-size 50-foot beds, 3 feet wide. 1 small 20-footer. Irrigation lines are getting buried. Fencing's going up. A grow tent full of transplants and start. And a bunch of very, very happy nightshades. And a couple of not so happy. And the first round of lettuce.
Today's episode is brought to you by Grown By. Grow smarter with Grown By. The farmer-owned cooperative, Grown By is the platform for online sales of everything. Custom and traditional CSAs, halves of beef, flower bouquets, wholesale to restaurants, and now Grown By supports in-person sales too. With their new app, Grown By Register, you can supercharge your market and farm stand, finally bringing together your online and offline sales and customer data. Grown By is proud to make local food accessible by processing SNAP benefits online and in person right within the app. Grown By helps you to put your best food forward. Schedule a demo today at coop.grownby.com/no-till. That's coop.grownby.com/no-till. All right, back to the show.
All right, our third and final Patreon question of the day comes to us from Norsk Guard Farm, who writes, quote, just to comment on managing extremes, this experience we are having with the excessive rain certainly leads to solutions associated with managing extremes. Now, too much water. Where sloping might have been mitigated to have flat beds and greenhouses and required flat areas when applying for greenhouse grant programs, these flat areas could and have led to flooding and runoff even when flat. So we'll add drainage tile between plots, maybe a slightly elevated bed relative to the path, but I cannot help think that a drought still needs to be considered for water storage. I know of some small-scale farming outside of Sedona that created sunk beds for collection of rainwater and other protections of their climate, of which I have no practical experience. Should we be managing for extremes? Any insight into applying the 80-20 principle for choosing our battles? I suppose it is a variation of an exit strategy for the business, but a seasonal exit strategy. I've not given up yet, but looking X steps ahead, it enters the realm of possibilities. I'll be 63 this November. I have some safety net and one other business, but man, it's disheartening when your freshly planted asparagus is sitting in a puddle of water, wilting. Forget about the other root crops. I 100% appreciate you. End quote. Okay, so thank you, and I appreciate you 100%. It is a good and big question. Effectively, how much do we need to prepare our farms for extremes, and which extremes take precedence? Because the same place that can have a drought can have a flood, sometimes within the same year. And bringing the Pareto principle into it, the 80-20 rule they referred to here, is interesting. It's kind of I hadn't thought about it this way. So to back up, the 80-20 rule is effectively that 80% of results come from 20% of your efforts. It's often used in businesses that, like, for instance, look at their numbers and see that 80% of their sales are actually coming from 20% of their customers, or 80% of their profits are actually coming from 20% of their products. Like for us, maybe that's like lettuce. Lettuce is the driver of our farm and has been for years. 80% of is somewhat arbitrary, and it doesn't quite make up that much of our sales depending on the year, but a huge percentage. And when you couple that with cherry tomatoes, those two probably do make up like 20% of our work and do bring in 80% of our revenue. Again, depending on the year and where we're selling and all those things. Anyway, maybe this principle is more of a subject for another time, but how does that principle relate to farming and resilience? Well, I think one part of it could be something like soil organic matter. Building and improving soil organic matter will address both droughts and heavy rainfalls to some extent by releasing excess water in wet times and holding it in dry times. Site preparation, getting a farm ready in the very beginning is something you will only ever really do, well, you hopefully only really ever do once in the beginning of the farm. So that can have a huge effect on climate extremes, right? You have the drainage ready for the 1,000-year floods that no longer are waiting 1,000 years, and the irrigation ready for the extended droughts. We are seeing increases in strong wind events as well, so adding stabilizing elements to the tunnel could also be one of these small efforts that makes a huge percentage of the climate mitigation, and it can be a small cost in comparison to losing a high tunnel. There is no perfect answer here, and every climate is going to be different, but extremes are now the norm. We've seen all the flooding over the last 2 weeks in Texas, North Carolina, and New Jersey, and we haven't even entered hurricane season yet, so there's definitely more to come there. The wildfires in California and the rest of the West. Hoping those won't hit your farm obviously is not an action plan. We are having more wildfires, more extreme weather. Assume it's just a matter of time and find ways to protect your property. Whatever the most extreme thing that has any potential of happening in your region should be considered to some extent when setting up a farm. And oftentimes it doesn't take a ton of effort to mitigate those. It just takes some planning. Like floodplains are out of the picture for me. You don't plan to put your gardens there, even if that is where the best soil lives, because even if it is not flooded in your lifetime or your parents' lifetime, it can and will flood if it's in a floodplain. Other regional issues like fires and wind will take more thought. So I don't know if that was helpful, Bill, but if you are mitigating some of that with the drainage and securing the water with good irrigation and collection, plus taking care of the soil, raising the beds, as you mentioned, all of those things, then I think you are on the right track. At least you're thinking about it the right way. It's just difficult. It feels like a weird time to be having these conversations because the more sensible land management that we can get into action, the more climate mitigation we will see. But those farms have to survive the extreme weather, which is getting harder and harder to do. It's becoming like a climate catch-22. But I'm hopeful things will change if we continue to do this kind of work. Anyway, I will let others put their 2 cents in the comment section.
Farmer Jesse, Peter Edwards here, Maryland. Hope your voice is feeling better. I hope I didn't jump the gun, but I transplanted some starts. These are my kales from my own seeds. I planted some onion bulbs. I'm gonna put some potatoes in that pile. Also transplanted some lettuce and pak choi. Again, hopefully not too early.
Today's question comes from Patreon member and a dear friend of mine, Aaron Worrell of Cedar Chest Farm in Virginia, who writes, "Loving the show, Jesse." Thanks, Aaron. Here's a question I'd love to hear addressed at this time of year. How do you evaluate the end of your season? What sorts of records, reflections, or notes do you prioritize keeping for the future growth of your farm? And how do you use those records to consider changes that should be made? Okay, thanks, Aaron. I love these questions, and I think there are 1,000,001 ways to answer them. So I hope others will chime in. But for me, this is where a decision-making framework comes in, because the questions are not just about data, but are about decisions at their core. In other words, the core of these questions is, how on a farm should we make decisions about the direction of our farm? Put another way, if you know where you want your farm to go, that will help answer what information would be the most helpful at the end of the season. This is a subject I intend to spend more time on at some point because I think it's really dynamic and interesting, and honestly would be something I would love to explore more, not just for business owners, but for literally anyone in all aspects of life. There are several examples of decision-making frameworks online for businesses if you want a purely technical approach to these questions and to understand how big businesses make these decisions. For farmers, though, because this particular business is often so personal to us, so physically and mentally demanding, so difficult to escape. It's literally right outside of our doors a lot of times. It is hard to just make these decisions based solely on numbers. Quality of life must be factored into any decision-making framework in farming, or frankly, in any business. So I'm going to give you a couple ideas and approaches, and maybe you can glean something for yourself to use. First, I would go through each market or sales outlet and go through it asking yourself, what do I enjoy about this, and what do I not enjoy? Can I do more of what I enjoy about this, say farmer's market or whatever, and do less of what I do not enjoy? Can I fix the elements I do not enjoy? Shrink them? What would that cost, and is it worth it? Hannah's always asking me, what do you like and what do you not like about whatever it is that we're doing? I think that is a really important question. And that's helped us to answer big things like, should we move farms like we just recently did? And should we drop a farmer's market? And what we're going to do next year. We're going through that process right now. Obviously, you will have to do some things you don't enjoy sometimes in farming. So crunching those negative elements out and down as much as possible has been important for us, so long as it makes financial sense. But you have to identify what those negative elements are. Also, this is a yearly thing farmers go through, even if they don't realize it, because factors change. Our kids, for instance, once they started school and I started coaching their soccer teams, I realized I no longer wanted to spend my weekends at the farmer's market. I love the farmer's market, but it was taking away from my time with my kids. So we ultimately dropped farmer's markets from our business. But as the kids get older and are able to help more on the farm or at the farmer's market, perhaps we will one day go back to doing the farmer's market because they'll be able to help for longer periods of time. And we won't have to choose between spending time with them and doing a market. You should also ask these same questions of crops, not just looking at the profitability of each one, including your own labor, but do you enjoy growing it? Again, can you fix the elements you do not enjoy? Can you shrink them? What would that cost? And is it worth it? Sometimes you may realize that, wait a second, I hate growing tunnel tomatoes. Maybe I could use that space for flowers or baby greens instead and make up that income elsewhere or with different crops. Now, I don't want to pretend we are always the best at this on our farm, but when I look back at the big decisions we've had to make, that framework is almost always how it gets done, even if we don't realize it. Part of this stems from many years ago when Hannah and I did a holistic goals worksheet that the late, great Chris Blanchard, host of the Farmer to Farmer podcast, put together. And I actually will link that in the show notes. Thinking about your long-term goals is something every farmer needs to do. You can't hit what you don't aim at, right? And for me, having some sort of long-term holistic goal and standard is essential to making farm decisions, both big and small. I will link this worksheet in the show notes, but it helped us to reframe what we're doing and get on the same page about where we were going. Before that, I don't think that we ever really thought about ourselves in the business and what we wanted out of it. We just kind of were trying to satisfy the market. Holistic management is arguably the most popular decision-making framework among farmers, and there are courses and books, etc., out there to follow, but this, albeit somewhat cheesy, worksheet is a good place to start. Everyone should know what they want out of this farm life thing. Laying out your personal and business goal or goals is an important step, and again, will help you dictate the data that you keep. I should note that it is hard to find versions of holistic management that are not tied to Alan Savory, who, as far as I can tell, has not offered any sort of apologies for his military or political involvement in, nor his statements promotional of our apartheid in South Africa. So maybe not the best person to support. So take what you can from the free worksheet and piece together a framework for yourself. It does not have to be completely or particularly eloquent. Just what are you working towards right now, and how does that jive with the other people involved in your life or involved in the business? To your question about what sort of records to prioritize, I think it is important always to know what is profitable and where your time is going, so you have data to look at when you're trying to make these decisions. On the technical side, we are certified organic, so we have all of our production notes that we can refer to in whatever way we need to, like when we planted, how much we harvested, how much came back from market or didn't sell, etc. I'm also a big fan of keeping a family budget and farm budget that is updated every day or regularly so that we can look back at that, where we were earning what and from what source. Like, was it from the market? Was it from our retail outlets? Was it from restaurants? And how that changes over year. I know I have already mentioned this book from Richard Wiswall, The Organic Farmer's Business Handbook, this one. But on the financial side of things, that is the most rational and easy to digest breakdown I have read. So definitely pick that up if you have not already. Also, I would love to hear what decision-making frameworks you all use or have found helpful. Let us know in the comments and wherever else you let me know things. Anyway, great questions, Aaron, and I think they are questions we will continue to explore in many different ways throughout the life of the show.
Today's episode is brought to you by Good Agriculture. If you'd rather be on the farm than inside doing your taxes, you are not alone. Good Agriculture handles farm bookkeeping and tax filing, so there is no scrambling at tax time. They keep your books clean and up to date and show you where your farm's finances stand. If you're behind, they'll get you caught up. They also help farmers find funding and stay ahead of grant deadlines. You run the farm, they help the business. Learn more at goodagriculture.com/info. That's goodagriculture.com/info. All right, back to the show.
Okay, so these last two topics sort of have me thinking about the idea of drift. Drift is the term that we usually use to describe what happens when an herbicide is sprayed at the wrong time and it drifts through the air and contaminates areas around its intended target, natural woodlands, parks, or other farms, gardens, people, water, whatever it touches. But, and this is important, there are good drifts too. Now, I've discussed this in other videos a long time ago, but this idea of positive and negative drifts started for me when I was a much younger farmer living in the woods and managing a small garden with my wife, Hannah. I'd spent that day hauling manure from a neighbor's barn and loading up my small pickup truck. I would fill the truck by hand, drive about a mile or so back to my farm and unload it by hand. And in the side view mirror, I could see some of the manure blowing off of the truck bed all along the road. I was bemused watching some of my hard work blowing away, but also joking with my wife about how our neighbors were going to be pretty annoyed with me for making their lawn so productive that season. Then on my final load, I started to notice that some of the foliage in the woods near our house had a funny brown look to it. This particular road was shared, and it occurred to me that our neighbors, whom, to be clear, I loved dearly, were out spraying their soybeans with herbicide. This browning in the woods was drift. Effectively, the herbicide was drifting down into the woods and all along the tree line of their fields. But whereas the drift from our practices was going to make the world around our farm healthier and more robust, this drift was just killing random plants and wildflowers in the woods, contaminating streams, just nothing good. And it started to occur to me that farms cannot be contained. No deed or fence row can stop the wind, stop the birds from flying through, the insects from landing, the weed seed, the water table, any of it. Then it spreads out into communities, on the food, in the wells, in the economy. And when you farm with death, like herbicides and pesticides, that is what spreads. But, and not to be corny here, but life spreads too. When you farm with life, healthy farms make other farms healthier. Good ecology begets more ecology across the fence row. If we're talking things like birds and monarch butterflies, that is work that spreads across the globe. Now, I'm not going to pretend I run a perfect farm. We use plastic tarps for weed control, decreasingly, but we still use them, and those will one day end up in a landfill. I still drive gas-powered vehicles, use a fair amount of energy on our farm and in our home. I use a smartphone, a dumb computer, and those things drift negatively as well. That is, they do or will pollute environments and communities, but good drift is the goal. Good drift is what we're always working towards. Good drift is the North Star, as Joe described it in his question in the last segment. The things we do on our farm should make not only our customers healthier and ourselves healthier, but our communities and everything around us. And they will, because there is no way to contain the drift of life any more than there is to contain the negative drift, the drift of death, as we'll call it. To be clear, not all neighbors are going to care about the negative drift, nor necessarily welcome the positive drift. But the thing is, nature is never going to recognize our land deeds and surveys, ever. No matter what we do on our farms or in our gardens, it will drift, for better or worse. So the drift is unavoidable. We just have to choose which drift we will embrace.
All right, I hope you enjoyed that little hybrid episode. Really appreciate your patience on the voice as always, and looking forward to a potentially better week next week. I'm getting closer and closer, a little more power every single day. Don't forget, No Till Growers is a nonprofit 501c3, so donations are tax deductible and greatly appreciated. Please make sure to like and subscribe and or follow wherever you're getting this podcast. That's an easy way to help us out as well. Enormous thank you to all of our show sponsors. And if you'd ever like to sponsor the show, you can reach out to Farmer Michelle at notillgrowers.com. Huge shouts to Willie Breeding for the theme music, Mike Hilbert for the production help and editing, and my wife Hannah for absolutely everything in the world. Also, shouts to Epidemic Sound for the background music that you can hear. I'm sure it's awesome. Pick up a hat or a copy of my book, The Living Soil Handbook, at notillgrowers.com. And we're going to have some new hats next week. Should I just tease them just a little bit? I'm going to tease. There we go. I don't even remember where I was. We'll just say big thank you to everyone over at patreon.com/no-till-growers, where at a certain level, or if you just bump up from one level to another, or you sign up in the month of March, you will get a shout out on the show, but we're going to hold off again on shout outs until I can do a full episode. That's like my goal. Once I can do a full episode, we'll do a full story. We'll do a full shout out. It's going to be awesome. So stay tuned. And thank you all again for all of your patience. Much love. See you on, let's say Monday. Monday's a good day. We'll do it then. Bye.
drawing out in booing lines. While the sea
Ugh, I barely got any sleep last night.
What? Why?
I spent hours fighting with AI, all because I was trying to make a website. It started out okay, but then I got stuck just trying to change one button.
Okay, relax. Just try Wix Harmony.
What's that?
It's Wix's new website builder. Lets you switch back and forth between AI tools and hands-on editing anytime.
So I'm not just prompting and praying?
Nope. Just try it for free at wix.com/harmony.